Imagine stumbling upon a treasure so vast and promising that it was initially dismissed as a foolish expense, only to later become one of the richest assets of a nation. This is the story of how the United States bought Alaska from Russia, a purchase that has been misunderstood and misrepresented for over a century. Let's start by understanding that when the United States acquired Alaska in 1867, many critics ridiculed the deal. They coined names like Walrussia, Polar Bear Gardens, and most famously, Seward's Folly. It was believed that the nation had wasted millions on a barren, frozen wasteland, far removed from the heart of American expansion. However, as history has shown, what seemed like an impractical purchase turned out to be an incredibly lucrative investment. Today, Alaska is known for its abundant natural resources: whale oil, fur, gold, fish, and petroleum that have generated hundreds of billions of dollars in profits. The state's wealth is so impressive that residents enjoy no state sales tax, no income tax, and even receive an annual stipend from the Alaska Permanent Fund. The roots of this story stretch back centuries. Long before the United States set its sights on the region, Russia had been expanding eastward. In the late 1500s, Russian explorers began venturing into the vast uncharted territories of Siberia, driven by the promise of the fur trade and a desire to expand the Russian Orthodox faith. Over time, the Russians pushed further, establishing trading posts and settlements in territories that were little more than blank spots on European maps. By the early 1700s, the region that would later become Alaska was on the radar of European powers. One of the key turning points in this expansion was the expedition led by Danish explorer Vitus Bering under the orders of Peter the Great. In 1724, Bering set sail from the Russian port of Okhotsk, embarking on a journey that would prove historic. After years at sea, Bering and his crew became the first Europeans to lay eyes on Alaska. Their explorations, though fraught with hardships and loss, including the tragic death of Bering himself, provided the first detailed cartographic assessments of a region that had until then been a vast white space on maps. Following these early explorations, the Russian government recognized the commercial potential of the fur trade in the new territories. By the mid-1700s, Russian settlements began to appear along the Alaskan coast and in the Aleutian Islands. The Russian-American Company was established to manage the fur trade and secure Russia's claims in the region. By the 1840s and 1850s, the once thriving fur trade was no longer a sustainable source of income for Russia. At the same time, the Russian Empire was embroiled in other conflicts and facing mounting economic pressures. The Crimean War had drained Russian resources, and defending such a remote territory from potential British aggression had become an ever more challenging and expensive proposition. It was in this context of declining profitability and strategic vulnerability that the idea of selling Alaska was born. In 1856, high up in the corridors of Russian power, the discussion about divesting the territory began. Russia realized that holding on to Alaska was no longer in its best interest. The territory was not only losing its commercial appeal, but also posed a defensive liability, especially with Great Britain expanding its influence in the region. Enter William H. Seward, the U.S. Secretary of State under President Andrew Johnson. Seward was an ardent believer in the idea of American expansion and had long envisioned the United States reaching the Pacific. Despite initial hesitation from many in the American government and media, Seward saw the potential in acquiring Alaska. He believed that the territory held untapped resources that would one day prove invaluable and strategically place the United States in a strong position in the Pacific. In 1867, a Russian diplomat named Eduard de Stukl who was well acquainted with American politics and married to an American, was sent to Washington to negotiate the sale of Alaska. Negotiations took place at the Russian legation, where Seward and Stuckel engaged in a series of discussions that were as much about strategic positioning as they were about financial terms. Although Stuckel was initially authorized by Tsar Alexander II to sell the territory for any price above $5 million, Seward pushed for a deal that would cost the United States no more than $7.2 million, a price that, when broken down, amounted to only about 2 cents per acre. The deal was struck, and despite the skepticism from many Americans who later branded the transaction as Seward's folly, the purchase was ratified by President Andrew Johnson. The transfer of Alaska from Russian to American hands marked the end of 125 years of Russian influence in the region and the beginning of a new chapter under the American flag. In exchange for the territory, all Russian settlers were given 3 years to leave or become American citizens, and the vast, largely uninhabited wilderness was renamed Alaska, a name derived from an Aleut word meaning the mainland. At first glance, the purchase of Alaska appeared to be a questionable decision, a costly gamble on a land that seemed remote, inhospitable, and lacking immediate value. However, history has proven that the decision was anything but foolish. Over time, Alaska has revealed an abundance of natural resources that have fueled its growth and prosperity. The exploitation of its rich deposits of oil, gas, minerals, and other commodities has transformed the state into an economic powerhouse. The revenues generated from these resources have not only enriched the national economy, but have also allowed Alaska to implement policies such as tax exemptions for its residents and the creation of the Alaska Permanent Fund, which distributes annual dividends to its citizens. Furthermore, Alaska's strategic importance became evident during World War II and continues to be significant today. Its proximity to the Arctic and the vast natural resources beneath its icy surface make it a vital asset in terms of national security and economic strategy. The state's history of natural resource exploitation has paved the way for industries that are the backbone of its economy. Historical research shows that many influential newspapers and commentators at the time recognized the long-term benefits of acquiring Alaska. They described it as a bargain and emphasized its strategic and economic potential, perspectives that have since been overshadowed by the more sensational notion of Seward's folly. The United States recognized that the territory offered not just immediate resource wealth, but also a gateway to the vast Pacific markets of Asia. It was a move designed to secure the nation's position as a Pacific power, with the potential to influence trade and defense strategies in the region for generations to come. Even more telling is the impact that the Alaska Purchase has had on the state's native populations. Although the transfer of power was not without its severe consequences for indigenous peoples, who were forced to contend with new policies, loss of land, and cultural suppression, this decision, made in the shadow of post-Civil War challenges and amidst shifting global power dynamics, has proven to be one of the most beneficial transactions in U.S. history. Thank you for joining me on this deep dive into the real story behind the Alaska Purchase. If you found this explanation insightful, please like this video, share it with your friends, and subscribe to the channel for more historical insights and detailed explorations into the events that have shaped our world.